Welcome back to another episode in the Kung Fu Closet for Kung Fu Conversations with Owen Schilling and Randel Davis. Welcome. Let's do our roll call. Our email is kungfuconversations@gmail.com. Our Instagram is KF Conversations. You can also find us on Facebook. We also have our YouTube channel. Find us anywhere. Spotify, Applecast, Amazon Primecast, anywhere you can find it. You can find on our YouTube page and our Instagram our Fourth Wall account where we have awesome t-shirts.
Excellent t-shirts.
Awesome t-shirts. We've even got pillows now.
Hell yeah.
You have a Buy Me a Coffee account where you can support our show for just as little as a cup of coffee at Kung Fu Con Pod. That is Kung Fu Con Pod. And your name of your school, sir?
It's Boulder Internal Arts in Boulder, Colorado.
What are you teaching over there, my friend?
Mostly Bagua, mostly Shingi.
Okay. And then aren't you everywhere else? Like Facebook,
Yes.
YouTube, all the good stuff?
And all of the things.
All of the socials. And then my school is Red Force Chinese Boxing. You can also find me on all the socials. And you can find me twice a month down in Denver teaching at 5280 Shaolin, or in local parks, or in the famous Kitchen Queen.
Yeah.
That has been in existence for a decade now. Whew. It's good to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you too, dude.
So what are we talking about today?
What are we talking about? Give it to us.
I think we're talking about power and tactics. And are they the same or are they different?
Okay.
And then maybe what the role is. And I think that's such an interesting thing too, because that role is such a different thing maybe in these different arts that we train and how they're expressed.
Yes. Totally agree with that.
Do you want me to step on this landman for us?
Do it.
Okay. It's a topic that has kind of ruffled my tail feathers. If the legend of Wing Chun is true, then, it was legendarily invented by a woman, which is great. That's a cool thing. But a lot of people seem to think that just because it was invented by a woman that we wouldn't do strength training. And I say, shame on you. Shame on you for thinking that. So what you're telling me is we've got great transitions and great ways to deal with somebody else's force, but we have no ways to apply our own force? That doesn't make sense. Like if you just think on it on a logical scale, that does not make sense. So Wing Chun has a way to develop a relaxed power method. Now, I'm not going to get into the internal or external debate, but I will say that at least how I was taught, it's a little bit more, I call it the whipping power, right? It's a little bit like you're goofing around with your buddies in the locker room and you snap somebody on the butt with a towel. That is a little bit of the power that, the beginning and intermediate Wing Chun student should have. Later on, you can goof around with what I call like your hydraulic power. It's a little bit like a front end loader or something like that, where, you might be dropping one part of the body down, but it's helping to extend and push another part of the body forward. So, it's kind of that dynamic movement that you might find in Tai Chi with push hands, where it looks like the hands are going down, but for some reason that other person that's engaged is actually moving up. So it's got that quality to it where it's moving multiple planes at once. But that takes a long time to work on, and it takes a long time to develop. But there is a power method in Wing Chun. And to say that just because it was invented by a woman that it doesn't have that, I think that's very foolish. But
not to mention kind of sexist.
It very much so. Very much so, Okay.
Just saying.
Yeah, very much so. So, yes, if it was invented by a woman, fantastic. But it also has to be able to apply knockout power. And it has that. It doesn't rely on pure brute force. It really tries to rely on the skeletal structure and how to align and all those other things. So it may be, for the talk, it may be external, but I think it's a higher refinement of an external principle. It does take work. It's not an overnight skill that you can develop with the Wing Chun power. I think it's something that, if you believe in arts, some of them can start in yin and move to yang. And if you believe that other arts can start with yang and then move to yin, I really believe Wing Chun starts with, a good Wing Chun. It should start with relaxed power. And it doesn't have to be all of your power at once, right? I always joke with my new students now. I'm like, let me ask you something. On your first day of learning how to lift something, do you try to max out? Or do you actually try to learn how to do the movement? there are cues when you're doing even something as simple as a bench press. Yes, it may be point A to point B lifting, but if you really want to do it and perform that well to get the best benefit and results, you're probably going to go with an empty bar or a lighter bar. And your coach is going to give you protocols and things that you need to look for. Things that relate to the bar itself, how you position yourself around the bar, and then actually things that you're going to look at in your own body. Is your back flat? Do you have a light arch? Where are your shoulder blades? They need to be making contact with certain things. It's going to be the same thing if I'm teaching the Wing Chun stance and the Wing Chun posture, because that stance and posture helps deliver a worthwhile punch. But on the first day, I'm not asking my student to hit with full force, right? I do like to use percentages. I find it very, very useful. But I'm always like, hey, just kind of think about and feel what maybe 10% or 20% feels like in your body. You don't have to know the precise number, but just get a guesstimate. But when you start using those lower percentages, that keeps them from throwing full force, and it keeps them from hurting themselves because they're learning a new advanced movement, and they might not even have a relationship with their body, right? So if it's the first day and you're trying to have somebody hit with full force, I feel like the student's going to get hurt more than the person, receiving the other end of it. Yeah. What do you think about that, Owen? We're just talking about power right now, but what do you think about that?
Well, I don't really have much of a take on sort of, for lack of a better set of terminology, more external type of martial arts, right? Because I mostly internal martial arts. And I think from an internal martial arts perspective, like power is the thing. I think power is the main thing that internal martial arts has to have. So if we don't have the correct power development method, and if that methodology is not executed in the student, then the power will either be one, substandard, or they won't have it at all. And in which case, I think that they should just go practice some other art. I think it's sort of nonsensical, because you look at a lot of the movements in Taiji, you look at a lot of movements in Shingi, and you're like, what are those movements for? It's not necessarily obvious. Like when I look at a Thai boxer, I can look at a Thai boxer and I go, okay, I know what this person's doing, and it's fucking awesome because Thai boxing's fucking amazing.
Agreed.
And they have their own methodology behind how they develop their power and the cues that they like to do, and then the pieces, and the individual pieces that they need to train to develop the type of power that they use in Thai boxing, just like you were saying with the Wing Chun. And the internal martial arts piece is more difficult because there's, if you're really looking to do like some authentic internal martial arts, the power generation takes quite a while to get spun up on and to do correctly. And without that, a lot of the techniques they're not great. At least that's my take on it. And I think that I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I don't know if I've actually said this on the show before, but I think that, like I look at like Tsun or like drilling fist from Shingi, and I'm like, okay, that's great. But like, I would rather, if I didn't have like real solid internal, like Shingi type power, I would rather do boxing and do an uppercut.
Sure.
I think it's going to be a much better technique. I think the barrier to entry is much lower. I think people can pick it up much faster than they could using Tsun correctly.
Can I throw in 2 cents on that, and then I'll let you go?
Of course, yeah.
Not only that too, but there are boatloads of instructional videos on how to throw a correct boxing uppercut.
Shout out to Fran Sands.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. And not only Fran Sands, but I mean, there's books. I mean, the boxing uppercut has been around for hundreds of years, and there are texts galore that are not secretive.
Yes, exactly.
They're accessible and they're trainable.
And teachers who are accessible and trainable, and they're going to be more than happy to give you pointers on how to do it correctly. And it works.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
Whereas like, okay, you do Tsun and you don't really have the power angle, the power part of that. So, I kind of look at, you can say, okay, there's a number of different components that go into making any shape in Shingi or Bagua or Taiji or whatever. And one of those big ones is the power part, right? There are other parts, of course, in terms of, making the shapes correct. And there's the mind part and there's the technical part, and you need all of that stuff. But I mean, in my mind, you can come across a lot of the basic parts of those cues in videos on YouTube.
Sure.
In written, stuff.
Sure.
There's been a fair amount of stuff that's been translated. It's out there. But the power part is the most difficult part. And I honestly think it's the most secretive part. And I think that a lot of teachers, that's the thing that they kept. I think that's sort of in a lot of schools is the thing that was sort of hidden. I think in a lot of lineages, that's the thing that's been lost. And it's until you're exposed to it, it's difficult to know, because there's a lot of different, there's a number of different ways to generate power.
Sure.
So we've got, just like we were just talking about, you've got boxing type power. Well, boxing type power is not internal martial arts type power. And then within the internal martial arts, there's sort of levels to generating that power. And there's different kinds of internal martial arts power. So, is it like, are you talking about like Pungjing type power? Or are you talking more about like shocking power? I saw this list once of like, so I'm going to digress here for a moment.
No, please do. Now I get to twiddle my thumbs and be like, Owen hasn't talked to me about this. This is kind of cool.
I saw a list of somebody had made a list of Chin style Taiji, which they had the longest and most comprehensive list of types of power that somebody could produce that I've ever seen. And I think that there were like over 30.
Yeah, like it's like absorbing, transformation, swallowing.
It just goes on. There's like shocking power and cold power.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And until you actually have like some kind of hands-on experience with that, it seems like a bunch of fucking nonsense.
Sure.
You're just like, fuck off. This is like some sort of fucking kung fu movie bullshit.
Yeah.
But then once you actually like get some experience with those types of things, it's like, oh, well, shit, this is different. And they're doing a different thing. And so, and each one of those types of powers has its own methodology around the type of power you're producing, maybe you had to have a previous type of power developed in your body, and then you can produce the next level or type of power.
Sure, so it's stacked. It's not just, this thing's over here and this thing's over here.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And that's the super fucked up part, It's like, it's like,
are you going to get it? Are you?
Exactly. Who the hell knows, and how much of it did you get?
And how much of it do you need?
Oh man, that to me, that is the ultimate fucking question. How much do you fucking need? There's so much stuff out there. People, I've met people who just have piles and piles and piles of Chinese martial arts styles, methodologies, training gongs, practices, fodging styles. You just name it, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's kind of amazing and beautiful, but at the same time, it's a little daunting. When you start to break it down, you're like, Jesus Christ.
Especially if you're 9-to-5 guys like us.
Yeah,
it's like,
no
okay,
shit.
I got I think about you, and you're like, I've got a wife, I've got my animal,
yep.
I've got my mom and dad, I got my brother, I've got my group to train, I've got my own training, I've got work, I'm sorry, I'm harassing you. I'm attacking you with your own life, sir. I apologize.
That's all good.
I didn't mean to attack you like that. So what do you think? What do you think is the right answer?
I don't know if there's a right answer, but I know at least in my head where I like to sort of stand. And I think that there's sort of a baseline of power, the baseline type of power that you have to develop. And that's kind of like a Pungjing type power. Okay. And you can go a long way on that. I think you can go a really long way on that type of power, but it takes a minute, and it takes somebody who has a really solid method, and then it takes a little while to develop it. It's not magic. And that's the other thing. And that's the other thing that makes me fucking nuts is like, you talk to people and they're like, it's the energy, bro. Can you feel the energy? I'm like, man, I'm going to put the energy upside your head, and then we'll see, right? We'll see how you're feeling today. I guess I'm a little saucy today.
Yeah, boy, that bowl of ramen, really, yeah. You sure you didn't have the spicy ramen? I had the spicy ramen. Listen to you. Good for you.
Yeah, here it comes. But I think that that's kind of the baseline. Like if you can develop the basic sort of Pungjing type power, then you can build on it. And there's other types of power that are built off of that particular type of power.
Okay, you've got the power now. How do you apply it? You could knock down a building. Great. But what if you can't hit your target?
100%.
And that's where tactics come in.
Yep.
And I think that is something that most people have. They might have all the great tactics in the world, and that's great. But do you have the power to express the tactic? And I think that's another place that people get lost or misinformed, is they might have some great tactics, but are those tactics transferable? I think there are some that are. Mm-hmm. But are you taking something? I'll give you an example. Let's say you do Filipino stick fighting. Well, their stick fighting translates well, very well, into hand-to-hand combat.
Sure.
And they've got some wicked strikes and joint locks and things like that. And I know some people that have a method. Maybe that's the other thing, the unknown part of this conversation that we're talking about is the third thing, is the method. Do you have a way to translate that bridge between power and tactic? There are some people that take that Filipino striking method and the tactics that they've learned from the sticks, and they stick it on to their karate. And I've seen some people do it flawlessly. And I've seen others where it just looks like a hot mess. It's the bad brown sauce, if you will. And so, is your tactics founded and rooted in your system? So if you do Xingyi, are you doing Xingyi tactics? Or are you doing it's like, well, I learned the power method in Xingyi. Mm-hmm. But I had to learn Muay Thai to learn how to apply my Xingyi.
Sure, yeah. You had to stick some sand on there because you didn't have the tactics.
Now, is that Xingyi?
No.
Yeah. I don't think so either.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
So I just, that's the other thing too is, how much of either do you need? And I think that's a personal journey too. Mm-hmm. I'm working with a young man right now who I'm a huge fan of, Mr. John Rubio. And he has his foundation school, which is a fantastic school. And when him and I work together, I don't take anything away from his school.
Right.
I just give him a different perspective on how to look at the material that he already has. And so it's not that he's learning a new system. It's kind of cross training, I guess.
Mm-hmm. If you're like the Dong Hai Chuan of Wing Chun.
Oh my God. Is it because of my shape, or is it because I also walk in circles? You're doing low blows on me now. Yeah. I had to attack you.
Hey man, that's a fucking compliment. Dong Hai Chuan was amazing.
I know.
He was one of the most amazing martial artists. And for those of you who don't know, Dong Hai Chuan was the founder of Bagwajang, and and what he did was he took other martial artists who had different styles of martial arts,
sure,
and he helped them improve their martial art by giving them the basics of Bagwajang.
It's
when I say that,
yeah, I know.
Randel. You should see the face when I say that Randel is the Dong Hai Chuan of Wing Chun. That's what we're talking about.
Do you remember the old? Yeah, I know you don't. It's the old BASF commercial. BASF. We don't make the product. We make the product better.
I'm not that old.
Yeah. Oh God, you are full of it today. This is one of the best shows we've ever had. The giggle shows with Owen and Randel.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
But yeah, I guess it comes down to, can you apply the power that your system has that's unique to your own system?
Absolutely.
If I'm talking about the whipping power in Wing Chun, it's not 100% all the time. I need to be able to dial it in for each of the hands.
Yep.
And so I think that's where a lot of the training, a lot of the play, a lot of the tactic comes in. Okay, can you do that power method on an entry? Cool. Okay, so we've got before contact. Can you do it during Chisao? Okay, cool. Now you have an after contact application, an application of power through the hand shape or the tactic or the transition. Okay, can you do it in the form? Can you do it in isolation? Solo practice by yourself. Can you do it in a drill? Partner practice. And then can you do it in sparring? So, I mean, there are levels to applying power and tactic.
Absolutely.
And I honestly think that it's a good relay race, right? It's your 400 with the 4 people in the relay race, right? You have to be able to hand off the baton to the next thing. They have to be a well-functioning, well-oiled machine. And you know what I think? What do you think about this? Leave you with this thought, Owen. I know some really good Tai Chi people that are really good at push hands. Really good. And I've crossed hands. I'm like, my God, you're great at push hands. They have no entry method.
Sure.
They're great at the one skill of showing the power, but they've got no entry method. They've got no transitional method. They've got no, and so I honestly believe that certain systems have good power development, but have no tactic on how to apply it for either self-defense or combat.
Sure. Yep. I think that's very true. And I think that comes from an art like Tai Chi is basically extrapolated one particular aspect of fighting, which is, sort of the moment of contact. So there's no focus on bridging, and there is some focus on follow-up depending on what the style is. But they've taken that moment where contact is made and they've turned it into something amazing. Like they've specialized, if you will, in that particular moment. And I think that, to me, that's a lot of what push hands is. It's a lot of other things, but that's a big chunk of it. And I think that that's an important point. And what happens in that moment, because what happens in that moment is going to dictate what happens in the following moments as you start to apply the tactic. So but at the same time, it becomes a handicap because it's been turned into something unto itself. It's like, oh, well, how good's your push hands? Well, I don't know. Maybe a Thai boxer doesn't do push hands, but you still whoop your ass. So, that's
so fascinating the way you said that too, because you become so encapsulated in your own awesomeness that you forget that there's a big world of martial arts out there, and you've over-specialized in the things that make up your system, and you forgot about other human beings.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty typical of all systems at some level. At some level, all systems tend to get sort of caught in that, which is okay. If you enjoy it, go for it. Who cares? I mean, that's always what it's got to come back to. I mean, unless, you're worried about your life. If you live in an environment that is like you're worried about your martial arts life, then I probably wouldn't do kung fu right away. I might do something a little more expedient, like boxing or kickboxing or
Krav Maga, whatever.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Something that's just it's going to go from like 0 to 60. It's going to teach you how to immediately defend yourself, and then you can move on.